When Christ rose from the dead, did he have a real body? Now, this kind of sounds like an odd question, but when you look at all the kind of hijinks that happen after the resurrection, you might kind of wonder it for yourself. I mean, for example, what's Christ able to do with his body? He's able to pass through walls. For example, in John chapter 20, it says, "On the evening of the first day of the week, when the doors were locked where the disciples were for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood in their midst and said, 'Peace be with you.'" So he's able to pass through a locked door. Okay, that's one odd thing. Second, he's able to vanish. Okay, Luke 24, after walking with the disciples on the road to Emmaus, says, "With that their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, but he vanished from their sight." Okay, and third, somehow or another, he looks different. He seems unusual. There's a different form or a different appearance about him. So Mark chapter 16 says, "He appeared in another form to two disciples walking along their way." Now, so I don't know about you, but those are things that normal bodies, at least, my body, your body probably can't do. We can't pass through walls. We don't suddenly vanish, even if we wanted to, like in an awkward situation. And our bodies also tend to resist dramatic, sudden change in form. I mean, you could work out, you could diet and stuff like that, but, to suddenly appear differently is not something that's within our normal capabilities. So it might seem reasonable to conclude that when Christ came back from the dead, he didn't have a real body. His body wasn't real. It wasn't part of physical reality. It wasn't part of earthly reality. It was maybe something more like a hologram or some sort of spiritual mirage that he could control and project remotely. Well, of course, there's a lot of heresies involved in that statement, but maybe we can address those in another time. But what's the big problem with that? The big problem with saying that if Christ didn't have a real body when he came back from the dead is that it kind of denies something essential about who Christ is. And so we have to take a little bit of a step back, and we have to remember something fundamental about the incarnation, about Christ taking on human nature. So in the incarnation, the second person of the Trinity, the divine Logos, assumed a human nature and all the parts that belong to human nature. So Christ had a human soul, he had a human mind, he had a human will, and he had a human body. Now, there are a whole bunch of heresies from the early days of the church that deny one or all of those different things. But in order to be an Orthodox Christian, you gotta say, no, he has a human mind, a human will, human soul, and a human body. Now, the humanity of Jesus, however, is kind of interesting if you were to put it side by side with the humanity of Adam, before the fall especially. Now, remember that this is kind of an interesting point that especially that Paul makes, is that Adam is a prefigurement of Christ. Adam is a type of Christ. So Christ isn't a figure of Adam, but Adam is a figure of Christ. So Adam kind of looks forward to the fullness of humanity in Christ. But before we get there, when we put Adam before the fall and Christ in his incarnation side by side, we see some similarities and we see some differences, which is interesting. So Adam, on the one hand, he's sinless, and by the grace of original justice, his body was unable to suffer. It was immortal by grace. On the other hand, if we look at Christ, Christ was also sinless, but he chose to assume a body that could suffer and could die, and indeed did suffer and did die. Now, why is that? Why didn't Christ come better than Adam? St. Thomas thinks that there are three reasons why it was fitting, why it was a good thing, or kind of a beautiful thing that Christ would come in a body that's able to suffer. So first of all, part of the punishment of original sin, of the fall of Adam, of the deprivation of the grace of original justice, is that the body becomes subject to things like death, like hunger, like thirst and suffering, and so on. And so, in order to satisfy for the sin of Adam and of the entire human race, Christ took on this punishment. He took on a body with the punishment of suffering, of death, of hunger, and thirst. He took on a body with all the effects of that punishment, except for sin. And so by bearing that body, by living in it, and by indeed suffering and by dying, he pays back. He fulfills the debt. He heals the wound. So secondly, if Christ came back with a body that couldn't do these things, so say he came in a body that couldn't suffer, that couldn't die, that didn't need food or drink or anything like that, I think people would have had a hard time believing in him. Okay? We are used to humanity, fallen humanity. We're used to the defects and the punishment of original sin. So if this guy comes along all of a sudden out of the middle of nowhere, without being able to suffer, without being able to die, without any hunger or thirst, he would have seen not only inhuman, but he would have seen like superhuman. He would have been unbelievable as something that affects our humanity. He would have seemed on a completely different plane from us. And so St. Thomas thinks that people probably wouldn't have believed in him or believed in the truth of his humanity. And remember, believing in the humanity of Christ is something that's essential for our faith. It's something essential for our salvation. Third reason is that Christ gives us a very good, a very noble example for living out our faith, for enduring with patience and bravery the suffering that comes our way, and because he himself bore these things. So St. Peter writes in his first letter, Christ suffered for you and left you an example. So Christ, by suffering, teaches us how to live. So those are three reasons why St. Thomas thinks it was a good idea for Christ to come in a body that suffered, that could die, even though he himself was sinless. So Christ, although sinless, took on a body that bore the effects of sin, including death. However, when he rose from the dead, when he conquers death, he also conquers the other effects of sin in that same body. So this means that Christ's body after the resurrection is a little different. It's the same body, but it's changed somehow. And we're going to call it a glorified body. Christ has a real, genuine body after the resurrection, a real human body. If it wasn't a real body, then it wouldn't have been a real resurrection. Okay? If it was just a mirage, then he didn't really rise from the dead. But we're going to be able to explain, however, these odd things that Christ is able to do after the resurrection by looking at what a glorified body is and what it can do. And this is what's going to be coming up in our next video. So today's video is question 54 of the third part of the Summa, looking at Article 1, which is, pull it up here, which is whether Christ had a true body after the resurrection. And we're going to say, yes, he did. All right. Well, that's it for the day. I hope you're having a good day. Today it's a little kind of, cloudy, kind of dreary Seattle day. So hopefully you're doing something cheerful and bright on the inside. And I hope you stay healthy. I hope you stay holy. And I hope you stay awesome, okay? God bless and take care.